morning, Dawg Nation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Meriwether and Tharp. A little bit of a hitch in our giddy up as we try to get going here today, but it's all smoothed out now, and we're ready for a fun show. I'll say hello to all of you here right now. We are going to get into today a couple of topics, some of it related to schedule announcement that came out yesterday, including the big one in September. We'll give you more details on that. Also, recruiting news is out there. Terrence Edwards joins us today. Looking forward to having him back on the program. Let me also take a couple of moments here to get a couple of your comments before we get started today as well. Johnny Prescott talking about going to Starkville. We found out yesterday that will be a noon start, 11 a.m. Local time there for Georgia when they go see the Maroon Bulldogs here this year. So, given the fact that Mississippi State doesn't expect to be a very good team, and given the fact that's a pretty early start, you may be seeing a little sleepy environment there in Stark Vegas for that one. I'll also tell you from a high school football standpoint, that is my trickiest turnaround, I believe, looking at that a little bit yesterday. Senior Dog 54 on the subject of the Braves. Yeah, it is a tough situation here. Acuna's doing well, but boy, the rest of this team is really struggling. Randy Hall, as he always does, by the way, he called the shot on Zyke Helton yesterday, and mentioning the Braves, Georgia also got a big punter commitment yesterday too, which is no small thing. So we'll talk about that here coming up in just a little bit. So a lot of fun. We're going to get rocking and rolling, cover a bunch of ground here today. Recruiting, SEC network analysts calling out Kirby Smart, everything in between. In fact, let me tell you all about it. Let's fire up that animation. Good morning, Dawg Nation. I am Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Meriwether and Tharp. There is so much going on. Recruiting news coming all over the place from Georgia. We'll cover that here on the program today. Terrence Edwards joins us again today. I'm excited about having Terrence as a part of the program. But to kick things off, we also found out yesterday a new kind of, collection of game times for Georgia in the 2025 season, including one big one in September against Alabama that's already getting lots of attention. Georgia fans excited about the atmosphere. Georgia, non-Georgia people kind of using this as a way of kind of nagging UGA a little bit, taking a jab at Kirby Smart. We will tell you what's out there about that. And I think I have actually kind of a valuable reframe for some Georgia fans who get a little frustrated about this conversation. So we'll talk about that off the top of the program today. Glad to have you with us for it. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Meriwether and Tharp. And it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Meriwether and Tharp, your source for Georgia divorce. Find them online at georgiadivorceteam.com.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
If you had a chance to watch or listen to yesterday's show, you know that one of the things that we discussed was that I guess it was ESPN had ranked like the 25 biggest moments of the last 25 years, and fourth on that list was second 26 against Alabama, the national championship touchdown, Devontae Smith and Tua Tagovailoa. And we talked about that yesterday, about how there are a lot of, organizations, entities, teams, programs that if they face that kind of a disappointing circumstance, they might just not come back from it, that they might live with that for like 2 decades, the misery of that. And what we kind of celebrated yesterday was, really, for Georgia, that was not the case. Now, it was a thorn in our side, and Alabama, kind of used that as a reason for mockery, as rivals sometimes do, that there was some real pain associated with it. But we can actually kind of look at that now as sort of part of Georgia's origin story for what the program has become, a back-to-back national champion in 2021 and 2022, and really the gold standard, I would say, in college athletics. Kirby Smart unanimously right now viewed as the sports top coach, and that early setback kind of laid the groundwork for what would come after that. The reason why I mention that again today is that we kind of also have in the spotlight here a little bit right now Georgia's overall history with Alabama, because one of the things that we got yesterday was another kind of flurry of game time announcements. We'll talk more about some of these here coming up in just a little bit, just briefly. But it's like the big one against Alabama that gets a lot of interest from Georgia fans and those sort of outside the bubble of Dawg Nation alike. This is September 27th, going to be a 7:30 p.m. kick. This is about as big as I think it ever could be. My prediction is you think about the previous sort of high water marks for atmospheres. The Tennessee game in 2022, the Notre Dame game in 2019. I would say that Georgia-Alabama game, nighttime start in September, this may end up being like the biggest atmosphere in Sanford Stadium's history. I certainly think the Georgia fans are going to do their part for it. And there's a lot of backstory, a lot of reason that's true, notwithstanding the fact that in the Kirby Smart era, this will be the first time that Alabama has come to Sanford Stadium. Alabama hasn't been here in Athens because of the weirdness of the SEC schedule, hasn't been here in Athens since 2015, a day that very few of us want to remember. But on that particular day, Smart was working for the enemy. Smart was the Alabama defensive coordinator coming in here against Mark Richt, what turned out to be Richt's final season. But in the now decade of Kirby Smart as Georgia coach, this will be Alabama's first trip. So you better believe that Georgia fans are going to have something for Alabama ready to welcome them rudely into Sanford Stadium on that particular night. So Georgia fans are going to have a lot of keen interest in this. And those kind of outside the bubble of Dawg Nation, non-Georgia fans, media types, things like that, they're going to have their interest on this too, because as gets pointed out from time to time, I mentioned the 2017 game off the top of the show just a moment ago, that Georgia's history against Alabama in the Kirby Smart era has not been sterling. Loss in 2017 national championship game, loss in 2018 SEC championship game, loss in the pandemic year of 2020, loss in the 2021 SEC championship game, and then also losses the last 2 years. That Georgia has dominated almost everyone, but has not had that same level of success against Alabama. In fact, a year ago, in Bryant-Denny Stadium, another trip for Georgia to Tuscaloosa, big lead for Bama to begin the game. Georgia fights back. Ryan Williams has the sort of hero touchdown. Alabama wins the game. More disappointment, more heartbreak for Georgia against Alabama. Kirby Smart acknowledged it after the game that that's just sort of a real thing right now. This is what Kirby Smart said back then.
I don't know. What's Alabama's record against them? Has anybody got one better than 1-6? Displayed them 6 times? I don't think so. I think they got really good players. They got a great program. I got an immense amount of respect for them. They do a great job. I mean, Nick's recruited good players. Kalen's gotten good players in here, and it's a tough battle. Of those 2 of them been here, and they've been tough. They've been really tough battles. So a lot of credit to those guys and a lot of respect for them.
So in the moment like that, right after the game, there's not much Kirby Smart can say other than that. I do think it's interesting that he acknowledges, hey, previously 2 of these games have been here at Bryant-Denny Stadium, which kind of bumps into the point I think we're trying to make here, and we'll kind of get more to it in a moment. But Smart kind of acknowledging, in previous games against Alabama, the record hasn't necessarily gone our way. And if Smart's willing to acknowledge that, you better believe that analysts and others are going to notice it too. With the announcement of the game time yesterday, the SEC network was talking some about all of this, and Roman Harper, who happens to be a former Alabama player, I don't know that necessarily matters in this particular context, but the former Bama player, Roman Harper, the SEC network analyst, in kind of talking about this game for Georgia and why it looms so large, he also kind of called out Kirby Smart and kind of pointed out that, this is that opponent that Georgia just can't seem to find the same level of success with that it sort of finds against everybody else. This was a topic on SEC network television yesterday. It got written up in, websites across the country too. Let me let you hear Roman Harper kind of finding a rare reason to sort of, call out Kirby Smart, put him in the crosshairs, that if you want to beat up on Kirby, this is about the only thing you can beat up on him for right now. And at times media type's going to take advantage of that. Here is Harper calling out Kirby yesterday.
Alabama at Georgia, primetime, exactly what you said, in between the hedges. This would be interesting because Alabama looked like the best team I'd ever seen in college football the first quarter and a half of this game last year. We all said it. I thought it was going to be Bama by 50. But instead, Georgia came back, took the lead, and Ryan Williams was born on the national
He was 17
stage.
last year.
Oh, my gosh. Every time I did not know.
Goodness gracious.
How much does Kirby Smart need to win this game?
A lot.
You know what I mean? Because he just hasn't beat Alabama. And so
It is funny that
he hasn't done much in Georgia. You're right.
You know what I mean? Just overall, you know?
All right,
Still got to beat Alabama.
That's exactly right. Beat Alabama. It's been done before.
So that's Roman Harper on there with Dari Noka, and I think I heard Chris Dorgan's voice too, talking about how much does Georgia need to beat Alabama? Oh, yeah, it needs to beat them a lot. This is the one thing that Kirby just doesn't do, that Georgia just doesn't do. You hear Roman Harper saying that. Like I said, a lot of the national websites sort of picked up on that because it's pretty rare to have any substantial reason for criticism against Smart. Pretty rare to have that. Kirby's just, pretty well cleaned house. Viewed as the top coach, had the most success, not the current reigning national champions, but perennially over the course of the last few years, no one's been better than Georgia. So if you find a reason to criticize Kirby, it's just going to be interesting in the eyes of some because there's just so little reason for that here right now. And to many, the record against Alabama does sort of stick. It does sort of stand out as the thing you can kind of point out, this is where Georgia needs to be better. And there is a degree to which even Georgia fans themselves would agree with this. I mean, if you ask most Georgia fans, we've been talking about this on our show a lot. We take comments, we hear from Georgia fans. Hey, what's the game that Georgia most needs to win this season? What's the biggest, most pressure-packed game for Georgia? On a schedule that includes revenge game against Ole Miss, another chapter in the burgeoning rivalry against Texas, and road game at Auburn and Tennessee, and all that kind of stuff. Perhaps an improved Florida team. With all of the games that are on there, the game we hear most frequently, the Georgia fans bring up the most, is the game against Alabama for some of the same reasons you heard mentioned on the SEC network a moment ago. So it's not completely unfair to say what Roman Harper said, for the network to suggest what it suggested, that this is an area where Georgia needs to kind of check this box and kind of correct the record. Not completely unfair to bring that up. However, I also think there are some Georgia fans, while they would kind of cognitively acknowledge, yeah, you know what, probably need to do a little bit better against Alabama. Certainly there have been some heartbreaking losses that would have that kind of stood in the way of even more success during this first decade of the Kirby Smart era. There's some Georgia fans that would say that, while also acknowledging, man, it just sort of seems like there's a collection of analysts / opposing fans that just bring this up at every turn, and they just sort of use it as a cudgel against us all the time. And for that particular fan who's like, well, in a roundabout way, I sort of agree with this. At the same time, I think more has been made of this than perhaps needs to. What I think I can offer you today is a very valuable reframe. And I think that in life, reframes are just really important. A certain event or a certain idea is framed a certain way, and oftentimes that framing is not helpful to you. And so if it's not helpful, toss it out and reframe it in a way that's just more beneficial and more helpful. So I think I have a little bit of a more helpful reframe for some Georgia fans who do acknowledge, yeah, you know what, Georgia does need to beat Alabama, while also kind of thinking, I sort of feel like a lot of people kind of use this as an excuse to sort of, trash talk Georgia at every turn. Here is a helpful reframe. And as I kind of move into this, I want you to understand something. I totally acknowledge at the onset here that this is to a degree propaganda. I totally acknowledge that. And yet when it comes to stuff that's honestly not all that serious, and the sort of arguments and fights we have back and forth with the various opposing fans in our lives, or those who just like talking college football, there's nothing wrong with a little propaganda every now and then. You sort of feel like, well, people use propaganda against us. Why can't we use propaganda going back the other direction? There's nothing wrong with that. All of this is mostly just in good fun anyway. So for those of you who sort of get tired of the sort of Roman Harper line of thought of, oh my gosh, what's wrong with Kirby Smart? He can't beat Alabama. Let me give you a couple of things to consider as to why perhaps, even though on the one hand it's kind of true, on the other hand it's also somewhat overplayed. And the first thing here is something that Kirby Smart himself acknowledged. Now, Smart's not going to excuse make, but when Kirby was asked about his record against Alabama after losing to Alabama again last year, one of the things that Smart pointed out was, let's keep in mind, 2 of these games have been in Tuscaloosa. He's referencing the 2020 game and, of course, last year's game. As I said before, it's a little bit weird that this is the 10th year for Kirby Smart as Georgia coach, and this season will be the first time that Alabama plays here in Athens. That's a little bit of a weird thing. And this is where the kind of the propaganda part of this comes in that I'm completely unapologetic for. Here is the one response you need to give to people who are like, boy, Georgia loses all the time to Alabama, or Georgia hasn't won enough against Alabama. I would say the simplest explanation for why Georgia has not won more against Alabama, the simplest explanation is, well, actually, these 2 teams have played so infrequently that wins have been a little bit hard to come by. And you see all kinds of evidence of that. The fact that Georgia's never played them between the hedges in the Kirby Smart era. Well, this is a Georgia team that hasn't lost a home game since 2019. So if at any point in time over that period, if Georgia would have had a chance to play Alabama at home, would they have won the game? Well, we'll never know for sure, but could they have won the game? Almost certainly, just given the fact they've been, beating all kinds of teams, including the number 1 team in the country a couple of years ago here in Athens. So part of the reason that Georgia's won so little against Alabama is because they played so little, including never getting a chance to play here in Athens. Same thing when it comes to like the SEC championship. Obviously, there was the heartbreaking loss in 2023 and the frustrating, heartbreaking loss in 2018. But y'all, there was also 2017 when Georgia got there and Alabama was nowhere to be found. 2019 when Georgia got there and Alabama was nowhere to be found. 2022 when Georgia got there and Alabama was nowhere to be found. Georgia was 2-1 in those SEC championship games that did not include Alabama. Could it have also beaten Alabama in those games had Bama been there? Well, that's a little bit of a hypothetical question. The problem for Georgia in having more sort of times at bat, more opportunities to beat Alabama is Alabama has a nasty habit of not qualifying for the SEC championship game. Georgia's there. It's looking for its next big win against Alabama, or maybe it's its first big win against Alabama. If you want to go back years ago, it's looking for a chance to beat Alabama. And, oh, yeah, by the way, Alabama didn't win its division. So, once again, that's another example of no home games, multiple trips to the SEC championship when Bama was there, where you just didn't get a chance to play that game. And then, conversely, it's like you bring up the 2021 SEC championship game. I hate to tell you this, and listen, I'm someone who loves I love the SEC championship. It's my all-time favorite sporting event. But what we're about to see more of in the future, we also saw a glimpse of in 2021. It's essentially a glorified exhibition. Georgia did not need to win that game. And I'm not telling you that they, threw it on purpose or anything like that, but the level of intensity that you had seen from Georgia in the 12 previous games that regular season and the level of intensity you would see from them in the 2 after that in the college football playoff, it was a completely different thing. Now, once again, Kirby Smart wouldn't make excuses for this, and I'm not making excuses for it either. But the idea that on the sort of track record of negativity, for Georgia against, Alabama, I certainly don't think the 2021 SEC championship counts as equally as the rest of these do, just simply because that was not an elimination game for Georgia. They would play elimination games in their next 2 games in the college football playoff, and they won them both, including the one, of course, against the Crimson Tide that truly mattered. Now, admittedly, 2023 SEC championship, total heartbreaker. Total heartbreaker. It kept Georgia out of the college football playoff. But, y'all, that's also after a 30-game winning streak. If all of a sudden that's the kind of thing that you're going to beat up on Georgia for, then you're essentially saying that Georgia's only successful if it literally plays and wins every single game it plays for like 3 and 4 years, ongoing. I mean, it was a heartbreaking loss, but it's also the culmination of a 30-game winning streak. Like, what do you want from Georgia on that? And if you want to go back in time, 2017, 2018, for as heartbreaking as that national championship and then SEC championship loss was in those subsequent years, Georgia was also a huge underdog in those games in the second and third years ever for Kirby Smart as a head coach. Once again, I would say that kind of diminishes the meaning of the games, just given the fact that Nick Saban was the well-established power as the top coach in college football, and Kirby Smart was still in his kind of first years trying to figure out what it meant to be a head coach and how he shaped the Georgia program in the direction that he wanted it to go. Now, listen, as I said before, there is a degree of which that's propaganda. But you know what? We also bump into propaganda from the other side all the time. And I don't think the Georgia fans have to apologize for shaping this into a reframe that kind of benefits them a bit more. It did take Georgia a couple of years to sort of figure this out against Alabama. 2017, 2018 was just an example, we would say, of a program that sort of knew how to win in a way late in games that maybe Georgia hadn't quite yet figured out. But by 2021, they'd figured it out just fine. In 2022, they came back and won a championship again. And now it's Georgia who's on top of the college football world. Now, let me just sort of briefly, before we kind of move off this, mention some of the other games that we also learned about yesterday. We found out the Auburn game is going to be a night kickoff. We don't know exactly what time that's going to be, but for Georgia and Auburn on October 11th, it will be like at least 6, if not later. And I think one of the things that'll be interesting about this as we get closer is, Jordan-Hare Stadium has, I think rightly so, been classified as one of the toughest places to play in the SEC. Even bad Auburn teams had tough, good performances at home. I would say that's been less true in recent years in the Hugh Freeze era. Auburn's losing to New Mexico State, for instance, at home. Losing to Vanderbilt. I mean, they've had their issues at home here in the Hugh Freeze era. We think this is an improved Auburn team. We've talked about that a lot during the offseason. If that's true, then that means the atmosphere at Jordan-Hare Stadium will also be probably improved too. But I do think as we get closer to that, how much of that Jordan-Hare magic still exists the way that it has in the past, we'll be watching that closely. We also found out that the Mississippi State game on November 8th, that's a noon start Eastern. That means 11 a.m. local time. For a team that already expects to be among the worst in the SEC, this may be about as sleepy an atmosphere as you'll find. So I guess keep that in mind. We also now know that the Ole Miss and Texas home games later in the season, those are going to be flex starts either the afternoon or at night, depending on how the rest of that schedule takes shape. The Texas game in particular, I think we're going to save and talk more about tomorrow on the show. But for now, it's just important to know that when you think about the 2025 season, it starts to inch closer. And one of the biggest games we've ever seen in Sanford Stadium is going to kick off in September. It's going to be a night game. It's going to be an incredible atmosphere. And my guess is Georgia fans and the team itself are going to be more than ready. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Merriweather and Tharp. Glad to have you with us. No matter how you get to us, video 10 a.m., radio Athens Sports Radio 963, podcasts wherever you find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. Just really, really happy to have you here on the program today, and so excited about this upcoming season, and gosh, just can't wait for it. We got big announcements about big events we're doing this fall. Great opportunities, just sort of be there and enjoy the sport we love. We just can't wait for all of that. And we're happy to have you with us here during the summer as we talk and get excited for it. We're also thankful to our friends at Merriweather and Tharp who make it all possible today. I can tell you that nobody loves traveling and going to these Georgia games or being a part of the big home games in Athens more so than our buddy Bob Tharp from Merriweather and Tharp. I see he and his wife Ashley and their kids at Georgia games all the time, having a great time and enjoying just really the experience of following UGA in one of the special eras we've ever seen. And of course, that's a fun thing to do. But Monday through Friday, when it's time to get to work and roll up the sleeves and do business, well, Merriweather and Tharp is about something totally different than that. They're about serving you in one of the most challenging times you may experience in your life, and that is in a divorce situation. Let's face it, the statistics are what they are. In an audience the size of ours, tens upon tens of thousands of people listening and watching every single day, unfortunately, that means that so many of you, good number of you, have either experienced this, you feel like it's an unavoidable next step for you. Perhaps it wasn't chosen by you, it was kind of chosen for you, and you've got no say in the matter. It's just going to happen. Sometimes that's the situation here. Well, whatever circumstance you might be facing, if divorce is the obvious and unavoidable next step for you, our friends at Merriweather and Tharp want to serve you in that time of need and set you up for a level of success and a happiness in the next season of your life, which is a really, really generous gift. And that's what they want to do for you here right now. You know, they've grown so much recently that they're now recognized as Georgia's divorce team. That's one of the websites says georgiadivorceteam.com. We've told you about the offices in Savannah and Peachtree City and Athens, but now there's also, for our folks on the west part of the state, an office in Columbus. Now understand this. These are attorneys in those offices that kind of know the local courts, know the lay of the land, and that provides them even additional expertise to serve you if that's where you are. So if you're in Columbus and you find yourself in this tough situation or any of the other cities I mentioned, our friends at Merriweather and Tharp want to help you. And one of the ways in which they can provide that help for you is with providing you some cost certainty as you go through the divorce process, an array of options. You want a DIY option for a situation, or you want really, I think what has turned out to be maybe the most popular choice is the model M&T level of service, which is a really creative thing to, like I said, just sort of give you some idea of, you know, how to kind of get the cost certainty you need as you go through this. I want you to find them online. More, it's the website, georgiadivorceteam.com. georgiadivorceteam.com. Merriweather and Tharp is your source for Georgia divorce. All right, last week on the show, we were not able to talk to our buddy Terrence Edwards. Terrence was busy on assignment, as we'd like to say. He was coaching his high school team. But he's kind enough to give us some time here today, so we're going to talk more about everything going on with Georgia football with Terrence here coming up in a moment. Prior to that, though, let's get ready to go around the doghouse, and it's presented today by our friends at Daytona Beach, and I love having Daytona Beach, of course, as a part of DawgNation Daily. And I want to kind of roll through a couple of pieces of recruiting news that have been kind of accumulating. You know, we talked yesterday about a bunch of recruits shutting down their commitments. Mentioned George Smith, defensive back from Houston County. Mentioned Justice Fitzpatrick, the cornerback from St. Thomas Aquinas down in South Florida. Mentioned Brady Marchese, wide receiver from Cartersville. There was another one of these names. This is a big one. I think it just sort of slipped through my fingers. We didn't get this in the show yesterday. So let me also mention, fresh off what I believe is back-to-back weekend visits to Georgia for Seven Cloud, the defensive lineman. Seven, and we'll show you on the screens photos of his most recent Georgia visit there. Seven, according to published reports on multiple websites, has also shut down his recruitment now. And Seven Cloud is now, I guess, officially locked in with Georgia. This has been one of those wild rides where, you know, over a period of years, Georgia's kind of been in on him. Seven Cloud, you know, was away from football for a little while, kind of reinvigorated himself as a player at the junior college level, so much so that he started getting a lot more attention from other than just Georgia. Had signed with Drew Rosenhaus as an agent. Even on this show, we had said, okay, what does this mean now for a guy that Georgia's been heavily in the mix for a long time and holding on to that commitment? All of a sudden now he's sort of taking on the high-profile agent. Is this going to take a twist and a turn? Well, no, Georgia apparently, as our friends at Rivals and On3 have reported, and among others, that Cloud is now officially locked down and locked into Georgia, much the same way the trio that we mentioned yesterday. So that is really good news. Georgia also got 2 commitments yesterday, too. We knew that June was going to create a flurry of activity. We are seeing that. We talked about Zach Lewis committing from North Gwinnett here recently, and yesterday another offensive lineman, another interior offensive lineman, Zyke Helton, who it seems like Helton's kind of been in our life now for a long time, you know, playing for a high-profile program like Carrollton, getting a lot of attention, being kind of a major recruit for a while, former Alabama commit. Helton now locking in for this Georgia class here in 2026. And I thought last night on Before the Hedges, presented by Kroger, which if you always want the best recruiting information, Kaylee Manziel, Jeff Sintel, working together on that show, I thought Jeff did a pretty good job of explaining, you know, why guys like Helton have a lot of value and just how intriguing the story is of Helton, who, as I said before, has been a known recruit now for a long time, period of years, has kind of put himself in a position where he's able to join up, be a part of this Georgia class here in 2026, and why decisions like this have value to Georgia. This is Jeff last night before the Hedges, presented by Kroger, on the subject of Zyke Helton's commitment.
You know, Zyke, you got to start about this. Former Alabama commitment.
Yep.
really early, and I think that's like freshman year, sophomore year. And then he has an illness where he lost a lot of weight, Kelly. I'm talking like 60, 70 pounds, and he was like 220 a year ago, 230, 240 a year ago. And that really changed his eval. Like he needed to get back up to the 290 threshold. Zyke was, played some really good football at Carrollton. I mean, that's the top shelf football in the state. But his Final Four was down to Tech, Bama, Florida State, and Georgia. And I think Georgia, what they see there with Zyke is like, okay, maybe guard, maybe center. Again, this is another guy who wanted to be at Georgia. My information leads me to believe that he's wanted to be a Dawg for a long time, and he finally got the green light from the staff to do so. And again, it's another Georgia boy. It's another homegrown for the Great Wall of Georgia. And I can't help but wonder that these are not big spends for Georgia right now on the revenue share front. So it means, they're still chasing some very big whales in this class. And to me, it feels like that's what they're trying to do. They're saving a little bit of money, it looks like to me, but they're still getting really doggone good football players.
So what Jeff describes there as it relates to Zyke Helton feels like it's of the moment in this kind of revenue sharing NIL era in which we live. But I think there's a degree to which that's sort of always been true. I've said this in the past that in the old days when a signing class was like 25 guys, I've always been of the belief that, and you've maybe even heard me say this in the show, you can't fight 25 wars. You can't fight a war on 25 different fronts. If every single recruitment is contested, you're just going to spread yourself too thin, and you're not going to have the juice and the energy that you need to win the real recruiting battles that can really change the shape of a class and change the shape of a roster. I mean, just kind of thinking out loud, sort of making this up, I think you've got room for about like five or six like really big knockdown dragouts. And this day and age, maybe a few more than that. Maybe it's 7 or 8, whatever it is. But I think you can handle half dozen, maybe slightly more, like real knockdown dragouts. But you've always got to have some of those guys, in the case of Helton, who Jeff would describe as, this is a guy who really wanted to be at Georgia and commendably worked to regain some muscle mass and regain some strength after what sounds like a serious enough injury that he lost a lot of weight. I mean, honestly, that's a personal story of achievement for Helton that deserves to be told. But it also sounds like a little bit like Zach Lewis the other day. Lewis is a guy who really wanted to be at Georgia. Helton was a guy who really wanted to be at Georgia. And, there was a time, if you want to go back, 10, 15 years ago, that one of the biggest advantages that Georgia was thought to have as a program, one of the reasons why we kind of always saw it rank as the best coaching job, maybe not always, the coach ranked at the top in terms of performance, but the best coaching job was oftentimes thought to be Georgia, and the geographic advantage that Georgia had was one of the reasons that was viewed to be true. You were just so close geographically to so much elite talent, and so many of those guys grew up wanting to play for Georgia. That was just kind of a built-in advantage. Well, guess what? If you want to be the best program you can be, leaning on that advantage sometimes, taking advantage of that advantage, is just one of those things that you really need to do. And I think we've seen that with both Lewis and Helton here this week, that you've got to bank. I don't want to call them easy wins because they're still, this is a guy that's a former Alabama commit and a guy that would have had his choice of a lot of different places to go. But it's the sort of player who, because of his background, maybe already wanted to say yes to you. That you got to be able to bank these. You got to be able to add these to your roster, and over the course of time, sort of stacking what going to be a good locker room guy. Anybody like this that's fought this hard to earn this spot, you're led to believe is going to probably be a good contributor to the locker room culture once he gets here. You're going to be able to stack those guys in a class, and it seems like Georgia's done a little bit of this over the course of the last couple of days. I think this matters. It clearly matters now in a revenue-sharing age, but honestly, I think this is kind of how the business of recruiting sort of always gotten done. I'll also mention one more here. As a team, you never want to see your offense punt too much, but when you do punt, you want to have a great punter. It sounds like Georgia certainly has one of those. Wade Register also committing to Georgia yesterday. I guess the Coles kicking camp's calling him essentially like the best punter in America, I guess. He putting out on X, I'm beyond excited to announce my commitment to Georgia. Thank you to Coach Smart, Coach Benedict for the opportunity. Go Dogs, he says. So Georgia going out, like I said, whether it be Camarda or Thorson, Georgia's had a nice run of punters here, and if you do have to punt, flipping the field, creating that field position advantage for yourself is one of those sort of hidden keys to victory. So Georgia also adding that yesterday too. Recruiting's busy right now. It continues again as we head towards the weekend. And of course, speaking of Jeff Sentell, we'll have our chance to talk to him more about all of that tomorrow. For now, though, it is Around the Doghouse presented by our friends at Daytona Beach. I love it. I love the beach this time of year. I think you deserve a beach vacation. I think Daytona Beach, great place for you to go. It's easy to get to. There's an international airport. You can fly straight from Atlanta and get there, and then enjoy miles and miles, like 20, plus miles of shoreline there. Delicious restaurants. You like outdoor activities, golf, fishing, surfing, all of that you get at Daytona Beach. This is a beach that's been beloved for obviously, decades, more than a century around America. You think about motorsports, obviously, it's a big capital for that, but that's not the only reason people are going and loving Daytona Beach. It's a great time for you to explore all of this and take advantage of great, lodging deals, hotels, resorts, your chance to experience that. Find out more online. It's DaytonaBeach.com/hotel deals. DaytonaBeach.com/hotel deals for more on that today. All right, there's so much going on. Before we're done today, interesting numbers from ESPN about just how likely it is that Georgia might win the SEC. We'll give you that. But for now, on everything as it relates to Georgia football, let's talk to Terrence Edwards here today, the great wide receiver, the only member of the 1,000-yard club in Georgia's football history, here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Let me say hello to Terrence Edwards, who's busy this time of year, so we want to be respectful of his time and get right to him and let him get back to the business here. Terrence, I know those summer workouts are going on and everybody's trying to get in the best shape they can be for a fall that's, by the way, going to be here before you know it. I've had a few high school conversations lately. It's starting to get a little closer. How is it going here right now? We have not really had like the crazy summer heat yet. I feel like we're kind of getting there a little bit now. Humidity, certainly. How have the summer workouts for y'all been going here thus far?
We're on week number 2. So 2 weeks down. I think my guys have really worked hard, continue to get better each day. They're out there right now running heels. So I took a little break to come in and talk to my family at DawgNation.
I like that. Listen, we're glad to have you here, and I love seeing those guys out. We showed some video last week of your guys just because we were talking about not able to be with us, and we saw some of the workouts going on. So I love being able to see all that. And I just think that's a really fun thing. I want to ask you this, too, as a coach. We were just talking about Zyke Helton a moment ago, offensive lineman who committed to Georgia yesterday. Jeff telling us that, and this sounds like a serious situation, but it also sounds like he's come back from it strong, that he had lost a lot of weight because of illness and had to kind of work his way back to kind of an offensive line like playing weight. We talk a lot about the other end of that for like the really big offensive lineman, or in some cases defensive lineman, who maybe needs to drop a little weight. As a coach who works with athletes, what would you say is easier to do? It seems to me it may be a little easier for like the really big guy to drop a few pounds as opposed to the guy who's, just having a hard time kind of maintaining that weight up near 300 pounds to get up to that. As a coach who kind of watches other guys do this, is it easier to drop weight or gain weight?
I think it depends on your body structure. For myself, being a slender guy, it was hard for me to gain weight. And once I did gain weight, it was hard for me, especially doing summer workouts, to maintain that weight. So I think for bigger guys, some of the offensive linemen that I played with, it was easy for them to pack on the weight, but it was definitely much harder for them to lose or maintain that weight. So I think it just has to do with your body makeup and your body structure.
Yeah, it's interesting. In a previous life, I used to do some stuff with the Falcons training camp back when it was in Furman and Greenville, and you'd go there and you'd see like where the team ate. This is going back years ago. Obviously, there's a little bit different, kind of nutrition, science out there now. But because of what you said, this is back in the old days, like 2-a-days and things like that. When it came time to mealtime, they let the players eat just anything. Like they had a big ice cream cooler. It's all kinds of like just the same kind of foods that, just regular people would want to eat for fun, burgers and fries and things like that, fried chicken. They had all that stuff just laying out for the players because of what you said. It's like, hey, if it's 90-something degrees in southern heat, you're practicing twice. you're losing so much weight out there. There's really no, at least the theory was back then, you could just eat anything you wanted to, because if you're out there working as hard as you need to be, you're losing so much weight. It almost doesn't matter what you're eating.
Right. And I remember those days I've been farming at the Atlanta Falcons camp, the 2 years that I was there. And yes, it was a nice spread of food that we was able to eat. But that was back in the day when you had 2 really hard 2.5 hour tour days in the heat. So you had to continue to keep the calories on. So it was definitely hard for me to, once I did gain weight, then I lost it. Then it was hard for me during the season to gain it back because of how much energy I was burning during that time.
I know we would have talked about this young man a few weeks ago, but he's back in the news again. Brady Marchese, wide receiver from Cartersville, reaffirmed his commitment to Georgia this week, kind of locking it down. We're led to believe he'd gotten a big push from some SEC teams, a huge push from Michigan. That may have been the most, I guess, prominent competitor to Georgia, but now nothing to worry about. Marchese sticking with UGA. I love Cartersville as a program. I think Connor Foster's a really good coach. Great success up there, of course. What do you think of Marchese as a player?
I haven't watched a lot of him. I've watched just a little bit. I haven't had opportunity to really just study his game. But if all the reports were true that he was definitely probably going to flip to Michigan, and I guess the coaching staff at Georgia really prioritized this young man and just made a push to keep him, then that lets me know that Georgia really likes this kid, really think he has the potential to be a player at Georgia. So I'm gonna take their evaluation on this one, but I'm also going to go and do my own and watch him once I have some time to go and watch the young man.
What I'd said was, sometimes the best indication of what kind of player someone is the other schools that are in pursuit. So if you're fighting a Florida and a Michigan, programs like that to hold on to a guy, then that almost tells you everything you need to know. The fact that Georgia wants him to begin with means he must be a pretty good player. But if Georgia's, kind of locking him down so that a former national championship program like Michigan or a, hated SEC rival like Florida, so they can't get him, it's those other schools in pursuit that I think probably give you an indication of what kind of prospect this could be, right?
Right. And for me, I go off my own evaluation. I watch the young man, but if the top programs in the country is all after the young man, even though he's been committed to Georgia for a while now, you can that is a true indicator of the young man's talent. So Georgia's going to keep him from now. So I'm gonna trust Kirby and his team of this young man must be the type of player that Kirby wants in his program. Other teams thought the same of him to pursue him as heavily as they have. So he must be a talented young man. I've watched some bits and pieces of him from what I've seen as an early, just an eye test. He's a 6'1", 190 guy that can really run. I think he's probably hit 21, 22 miles per hour. So he has a bright future, and I'm happy that he stuck with the Dogs.
So we talked a little bit earlier about, we found out that game time for Georgia-Alabama, night game, huge atmosphere. I think it could rival the Tennessee game in 2022, the Notre Dame game in 2019 in terms of some of the biggest atmospheres we've seen at Sanford Stadium. I think the Georgia fans are going to be chomping at the bit. It's also one of those things, and we kind of played some of the stuff from the SEC Network yesterday where, people kind of want to remind you, for all that Georgia's done, they haven't had nearly as much success against Alabama. Admittedly, the numbers speak for themselves on that. It's obviously true. Haven't had as much success against Alabama as other programs. What do you make of that? And how much does that, previous history, put additional pressure on Georgia for a game like this coming up in September?
I think so. I think it's going to be just as big as the Tennessee game a few years ago when Tennessee came in ranked number 1 and everyone picked Tennessee to win. And we understand this rivalry that we've had. We have been on the opposite end of the winning in this. And now bringing it home at 7:30 is probably going to be a primetime game. It's going to be a great atmosphere. So I'm excited for that game. I think that game is going to have all the eyeballs on them. And Georgia just got to go out and perform like we did in the second half of last year's game. If we can put 4 quarters together, then I think we have a really good chance of winning that football game. But we're going to have to play 4 quarters and just can't play a half like we did last year.
Okay, so with that game in mind and the time we have left, I want to talk to you about Gunnar Stockton for a second because, Gunnar's going into his first full year as a starting quarterback for Georgia. And, there's a lot of people who kind of want to ask, well, how good can Georgia be with a quarterback like this that's played so little? And we've been honest. I mean, obviously it's fair to question a guy with, little in the way of experience, even though he played 6 quarters against, playoff level teams, Texas and Notre Dame. It's still fair to have some questions about that. I don't shy away from that. But let me give you kind of a positive spin on this for a moment and tell me how true you think this might be. So if we look at Georgia's 2 big games in September being road game at Tennessee, home game against Alabama, keep this in mind. Nico Iamaleava is at UCLA now. Tennessee is going to be starting a quarterback for the first time, too. Now, maybe Aguilar, the guy that came from UCLA, or it may be Merklinger or McIntyre, one of the guys that's been on the Tennessee roster, but it's going to be a new quarterback. And yes, Gunnar will be on the road for that game, but he's also played in postseason games now for Georgia. It's not impossible to think, even with the limited experience, Gunnar could outplay whoever Tennessee has on the other side, despite the fact that Gunnar will be on the road. Same thing for the Alabama game here, too, where, right now it sounds like Ty Simpson is likely to be the Alabama starting quarterback, at least to begin the season. And that's a guy who's been there for a long time and, to be honest, kind of passed over for that job, perhaps in the past. And whoever the Alabama quarterback is, yes, he can throw to Ryan Williams. But once again, the Alabama quarterback is going to be an inexperienced player, too. It's not impossible to think that Gunnar Stockton could also outplay that guy, no matter how good Gunnar turns out to be here this year. I guess, Terrence, the point that I'm getting to is that Gunnar has faced his share of criticism and maybe the skepticism, at least to a degree, may be somewhat fair. But, boy, 2 games in September, when you look at the quarterback on the other side, that it doesn't take some sort of huge leap of faith to think that Gunnar could be the better quarterback in the game. And if that happens, boy, the narrative around him changes pretty quickly, does it not?
Yes, it does. I think you are exactly right. I think both programs, the Tennessee program and the Alabama program, are breaking in new quarterbacks as well. So we're not going into a Bryce Young at Alabama type situation or an experienced quarterback like Joe Milton. And he wasn't the best at Tennessee, but he was an experienced quarterback. So we're going to go in there with the same, or Gunner's going to have even more game experience than those guys. So it's not foreseen that Gunner could go in there and be the better quarterback out of the 2 in those 2 games. I just think the supporting cast for Georgia is going to be a little better, especially against Tennessee. Tennessee's going to have really good receivers still. But I just think Georgia just had Tennessee's number, being able to stop that high-power offense. So Gunner just got to go in and just be Gunner. We've always watched Gunner in high school and know he's a winner. He is a quarterback that I would like to have on my team because he just understands football. The biggest thing that I think Gunner is going to bring to this team is leadership, and leadership goes a long way. And that's what I'm looking for, how the team rally around him, good, bad, or indifference, how the team supports Gunner is my biggest takeaway of what I'm going to see from Gunner, because I believe the team is going to play to Gunner's how Gunner plays, a hard, tough-nosed quarterback. I mean, he got hit in that Texas game, and, man, I thought he was out, and he went back in. So that's the type of quarterback that we're going to get, a hard, tough-nosed, blue-collar quarterback.
I think that's really good, Terrence. Very, very well said. Well, your guys are out there running those hills. We know that they're ready for a water break. So you got to get out there and give them a break. For people who, there you go. See, that's some of the action right there that's going on right there at Mount Vernon and schools just like it all across the state. I tell you, we love our coaches. We love the way in which they pour their lives into these young men this time of year. Becoming better as football players, but more important than that, learning how to be a good man too, which is what football is ultimately all about. So, Terrence, I appreciate the work that you're doing out there. And on the individual side of this, when it comes to Terrence Edwards Wide Receiver Academy, how can people connect with you on that?
Yes, we're still going. You can reach me on all social media platforms at Terrence Edwards Wide Receiver Academy. Terrence,
great stuff. Thanks for your time. Really, really do appreciate it. Incredible insight. We'll look forward to talking to you soon.
Thank you.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
I really do mean this, and some of you know this firsthand. You either have memories of it from your time or you see it with your own sons or something like that. There is just something about taking your what could be summer vacation. You're off from school. And the work that athletes choose to do, the work that the coaches choose to do to help foster and cultivate all of this. When it comes to the summer workout stuff, being in the weight room, doing the conditioning, in some cases you have a chance to do a little bit of walkthrough stuff and, sort of, learn more about, what's going to happen. You get into the acclimation period later on this summer where you get used to the heat. I mean, keep in mind, if you're a high school kid, you got friends who are playing video games, sleeping till noon, dragging themselves to the pool maybe for a couple of minutes, doing who knows what after that. But all across the state right now, and I mean this, all across the state right now, you got kids setting an alarm clock for 6 a.m., coaches are there before they get there, and they just get after it in the weight room. They get after it running hills in the heat. And yeah, it makes you better as a football player, but more important, it's how you become a man. And I love it. And I think we said this last week that, a lot of times around this time of year, you get some attention about, what Georgia high school coaches make, and they make a lot of money. But you start dividing it by hours worked, all of a sudden the compensation starts to feel a little different when you start thinking about all that time in the summer. Media's not there to pat you on the back. Crowd's not there to cheer you on. You're just digging deep and working, and that is what they're doing here right now. I love that. I think that's awesome. I really do. So shout out to Mount Vernon and everybody else grinding during the summer and getting ready for a high school football season that will be here before you know it. I'll tell you what else is going to be here before you know it, and that is Star of the Seas. Now, I do have to be honest with you here. A lot of y'all know that I have been angling to try to find my way onto Star of the Seas. I must confess, there was a conversation had yesterday where it certainly feels like some dominoes are starting to fall. And I might get the privilege of being able, from a first-person perspective, to tell you everything that exists on this brand new Royal Caribbean cruise ship. More details on this coming up soon. I really am super excited about it. I just think it's one of the most fun things you can ever do. I really do. And I'm telling you, there's not a brand out there any hotter than Royal Caribbean right now with all of the new introductions, the new ships as of late, Star of the Seas, the latest on that. And, we're only really just weeks away from this thing setting sail for Port Canaveral. And I do love the fact that, for those of us here in the Atlanta area or in the state of Georgia, Port Canaveral is really the closest port to us. It's the easiest way to get on a great Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. I'll tell you somebody else who's super excited about this too. That's my friend Jessica Slater. You can give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com, and she can tell you everything about how you can be among the first to be on Star of the Seas or to have some time on Star of the Seas at some point in time in the very near future. It's a great opportunity. I hope you'll take advantage of it. Now, let's get ready to go cruise around the SEC here right now. And let's talk for a moment about LSU coach Brian Kelly making an appearance on the ESPN College Game Day podcast. And my working theory on Kelly is I do believe he's a good coach. I do. I mean, I think that the number of wins he compiled at at Notre Dame prior to coming to LSU, I don't think you win as frequently as he does, always beating unranked teams, always winning as a point spread favorite. I don't think you do that without having, success as a football coach. I also, a smart football coach is what we would take to do something like that. I also believe that there is a certain level of emotional intelligence that I'm not quite so sure that Kelly possesses to the same level that other coaches do. I think Kelly says weird things. I think Kelly does weird things. I think that Kelly does not have the most fully developed sense of humor sometimes, and I think that makes him come across as a little bit weird. Well, here's an example of something that I think could perhaps border on being an unforced error. Now, listen, I'm glad when coaches say interesting things, so I'm not mad at Kelly for saying this, but this is just a little bit of an example of, do we really have to go there? So, Kelly is on this podcast of the ESPN, and the subject of Arch Manning comes up. Now, you know about Arch Manning. He's the son of, Cooper Manning, and his granddad was Archie Manning. Archie, of course, former Saint. They live in New Orleans. And so what Kelly says of Manning, he says, look, we hear it every day because Arch is from Louisiana. And listen, there's another guy that hears it all the time too, and that's Garrett Nussmeier. He's committed. More than anything else, he's experienced. And in this league, you need to see the bullets flying. So what you end up sort of feeling here is, wait, is he trying to call out Arch Manning to say, my guy is better? He goes on to say, now Manning's extremely talented, but he's got to go do it. And there's going to be a couple of days where it doesn't come out the way it's supposed to. How do you bounce back? How do you come back from that? How does it work the next week in your game plan? So there's a lot out there. I can see the assessment of Manning. He's an outstanding player. But I'll take the guy that's been in the SEC and see what that looks like. Now, this is the way that a lot of fans feel. And in fact, if you put that statement from Kelly on, a piece of paper and let people vote on it, favorable, unfavorable, I would say the majority of SEC fans, no matter who you cheer for, are going to have a favorable view of that take. Wait, there's a lot being given to Arch Manning before he's gone out there and earned anything. This is a league where you should expect to have some setbacks. How's he going to respond to that? All of that seems true. And I like it when coaches say things that are not sort of super coach speaky. So in a roundabout way, I'm kind of glad that Kelly is being honest here and saying what others are thinking. So no real complaint about that. But I can't help but wonder is if he is in a way of trying to build up his quarterback by saying, listen, my guy's played a bunch of SEC football. He's not getting enough credit right now, sort of accidentally steps into what can almost feel like bulletin board material for Texas and Arch, or sort of an unnecessarily provocative opinion, kind of out of step with most coaches who work very hard, especially this time of year, to give you nothing. Kelly sort of gives the ESPN guys on this podcast sort of a free gift. I think that's just sort of strange. And if Brian Kelly's like, no, listen, this is the way I feel, I want the world to know, well, good for him and more power to him. If this is another one of those sort of awkward missteps by Kelly, trying to support his quarterback, ends up sort of negging Arch Manning, then, as I said before, I think it just sort of expresses sort of a weird aspect of Brian Kelly's personality. So we talked the other day about the ESPN FPI. This is a analytics rating formula. I am not super smart. Can't really tell you how it's necessarily formulated. A lot of these ratings are also somewhat proprietary. That means they don't fully show all their work on any of this. But ESPN's FPI does give us percentage chances for who wins the SEC. Thought I would share some of that with you here just for a moment. Texas is first on the list at 34.1%. Important to know that when it comes to the percentage of winning the league, this is based on two things, or based on multiple things, but at least two big things considered heavily. The quality of your own team, of course, and the opponents this particular team plays, your schedule. Texas re-racks essentially its same schedule from a year ago, more favorable than many in the SEC. And so that's perhaps one of the reasons why you see Texas at the top of this list at 34.1%, but they're also expected to be, among the best teams in the SEC once again, too. So that's a big part of this as well. Georgia comes in next on the list with the second most likely odds, according to FPI, of winning the SEC at 26.9%. So Georgia kind of right there nipping at Texas' heels. And as we've been saying, you hear about Texas all the time. You hear about Georgia this offseason very little. For those who've wanted to kind of carve out a cottage industry for themselves, kind of taking a little jab at Georgia, as we talked to Terrence about a moment ago, taking a little jab at Gunnar Stockton, re-racking the criticism of Mike Bobo, whatever else, just be very careful. Just be very careful. ESPN says that both Georgia and Texas have nearly the same odds of winning the SEC, far better than anybody else. Alabama, for instance, is much lower than Georgia. Georgia's at 26.9. Bama's about 10 percentage points lower than that at 17.2. Now, here's what things get interesting after that. So you got these three teams, and this is the same thing the odds makers have. Texas, Georgia, Bama all have a win total of 9.5. Nobody else in the SEC matches that. Texas, Georgia, Bama also have double-digit percentage odds of winning the SEC. After that, and this you drop down to like Texas A&M at 4.3%, Tennessee at 4.2%. LSU at 3.5%, which is interesting given the attention they've gotten. Ole Miss at 2.8%. Then after that, the other half of the league is all less than 2% chance of winning the SEC. Like, isn't that fascinating here? Is that, for all of the talk of all these different SEC teams, at least in terms of a race for an SEC championship, the odds themselves would suggest still a 3-team league. And boy, how weird is it to see Texas A&M so high, given the fact that of the teams that, and their win total is about 8.5, the analytics really like Texas A&M, despite the fact that I've told you multiple times, I think that A&M fans are the least happy fans in the entire SEC right now. And of the teams that, will have a chance to be preseason top 25, they're the most nondescript of all of those teams, right? Mike Elko, the coach, has very little public profile. Marcel Reed, the quarterback, very little public profile. Other players in the roster, kind of a low public profile. It's really weird how little attention they kind of get, how little fame that program seems to be conjuring up right now. Now, sometimes that means they're undervalued, overlooked, underrated. Maybe that's the case for Texas A&M, but it's just really interesting that the analytics and the human perception of the Aggies right now, I would say, is sort of a good bit different. Let me also conclude with this. This has been out there. We forgot to give this the other day. So obviously the season getting ready to kick off, big game, Texas, Ohio State. We did find out that that is going to be the location for ESPN College Game Day and the final broadcast ever for Lee Corso. He's getting set to announce his retirement, sort of one more big game. This is a big one. It's ironic that both the big shows, Big Noon Kickoff and ESPN's Game Day, be at the same location, but obviously a huge season opening game, unless we're not fans of the Buckeyes or the Longhorns. But you got to acknowledge, if the defending champs are hosting, the only team in America that's been in the playoffs 2 straight years, that's a big deal. That's a big game, and I would say a fitting conclusion for Lee Corso. And I'll tell you, I'm real sad about this, I just think that, it's a little bit like we're watching kind of the end of the era for Inside the NBA on TNT, and I guess now we have seen the end of that era. Show's going to kind of return to return on the airwaves, but at ESPN. Like, I'm not even an NBA fan anymore, but I like Inside the NBA. They're just Barkley and Shaq and Kenny and Ernie. They just know how to do TV. It's just a good TV show. And there's a degree to which for a long time Game Day has been that for me too. And I would say that Game Day with like sort of rank and file college football fans is less popular than it used to be. I hear a lot of negativity, and I've contributed to a lot of that negativity. But man, this TV show has meant a lot to me for a long time, and Corso's been a big part of that. Even though, back when I was younger, when Corso was younger, back when we were all younger, there was a little bit of a, I don't want to say clownish persona, but it was not a super serious, like the headgear and stuff like that. There was a time when some of us were like, let's do real football. This isn't real football. This is just sort of made for TV nonsense. But honestly, looking back on it, that's what his job was to do, was to be an entertainer and do an entertaining show. And boy, he's provided that. And I can tell you that, I have a 13-year-old son now, and, even though Game Day is not quite my cup of tea the way it maybe used to be for my sons and kids his age, I think they still love it just as much as we used to going back years ago. That it's just had sort of a special place. It's a show that's figured out something that most TV shows just sort of never figure out. And honestly, I credit Lee Corso with that, probably more so than anybody that's worked on the show, and I've liked a lot of those people, but I credit Corso for it probably more than anybody. So he's obviously at an advanced age. We all know that. His, performance is not what it once was. He obviously has had a stroke in recent years, but I think he's behaved and performed with incredible dignity. I think the relationship that Herbstreit and Corso have had has been amazing. It's been fun to watch that. Inspiring to watch that in many ways. And I'll tell you, I am sad to see the end of this era, but we certainly wish him well in his retirement. And we look forward to a big game here to begin the season between Texas and Ohio State. That one's going to be a lot of fun. We'll also make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And as we wrap up here today, we will give you a golden shoe. So on our RS Andrews Cool Down, which is what we do on video in the show, we take comments, and a couple of things have come up recently about some of the, I guess, paraphernalia around the show, such as the golden shoe and our mascot Eddie, and it's caused us to go back and kind of relive some great moments from DawgNation Daily's past. One of the things we mentioned was back in the era in which Dan Mullen was the Florida coach, how easy of a foil he was for us. Just a really, soft target, easy to make fun of, sort of an endless supply of fodder. And one of our great folks who I love, Mark Morris, writing into me to say, B.A., do you remember when Dan Mullen wore that Star Wars helmet? That was another great Mullen foil. I miss him so much for his comedic value to DawgNation. And for those of you who don't remember, this happened. This would have been, circa 2019, I think it would have been. Maybe is 18 or 19. Maybe it was Dan Mullen on the night that Florida had gotten into a brawl with Missouri, Halloween weekend. He came into his post-game press conference dressed like Darth Vader. A lot of you remember this. Many of you might not. This is a real thing that happened. You don't think we didn't have fun with that? And then the following year when Missouri beat Florida, Eli Drinkwitz signed off his press conference by saying, "May the force be with you." I mean, gosh, what a great time for the SEC, man. That was a lot of fun. Life was simpler back then. We were loving life and enjoying that. And I appreciate Mark bringing that back to our memories. Really good stuff, Mark. We'll give you a golden shoe for that. And, we'll give a Dan Mullen one as well for being the doofus that he once was. How about the lousy, stinking Gators, boy? We've been making fun of them for a long time now, and it doesn't show any signs of slowing down. How about 1,678 days? That's how long it's been since Florida's beaten Georgia. It's our Gator hater updater. We'll see y'all back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. And, look at that. Is that new? Is that new? The icy, look at that. Can we? I hate to do this again, but can we do that? Look at that. I mean, you talk about an effect. That's amazing. Icy effect like that for the cool down. I love that. I hope Dari saw that. That's really good. That's very, very, very good stuff. And welcome into our RSS Andrews cool down. Let me also say, and on video, we will get some of your comments here and see how you're all doing. Baruch Dawg on the subject of College Game Day says, Pat McAfee's unwatchable. I'm wondering if he's going to carry on the mascot headgear tradition. Yeah, I mean, I am not necessarily super anti-McAfee. I don't have a big opinion about him one way or another. He is not personally my cup of tea, but I do get, the appeal. He's a big personality. For instance, I like wrestling. He's a wrestling broadcaster. He works really well in that environment, really well. Crowd responds to him in a big way. So I get the fact that McAfee's incredibly popular. He's super famous. It, in many respects, seems like a no-brainer. If you can add him to Game Day, you would want to. I'm not stupid. I do get why there is appeal for that, especially to the younger demographic that they want to keep appealing to. I would say, though, that my theory is the way the young audience gets to Game Day is via the dads who say, "Hey, man, this show's always meant a lot to me. Would you like to watch it with me?" And I just don't know that Pat McAfee conjures up that sense of nostalgia of, boy, this is Game Day the way that it always was. I also don't like the fact that Nick Saban curses every 5 seconds. Once again, I would say that's another thing that has sort of made, Game Day a little gross to me is, Saban's language, I think, is fairly inappropriate. That's not my cup of tea either. So yeah. UGA Marine says McAfee's considered a genius by the modern football fan. Most think he couldn't tell the difference between a pulling guard and a National Guard. Well, McAfee was a player. He was a punter, but he was a player. And he's just a massive person. I mean, you can't dispute it. He is a massive personality with a massive following. And what was it the hip-hop guy said? I'm not a businessman, I'm a businessman. He's a business. I mean, there is a whole industry built around McAfee for sure. Savannah Bryan says, very surprised that Game Day went to promote a Fox game and ignored many of their own games like Clemson, LSU, Bama, Florida State. He says, by the way, Corso graduated from Florida State. That's indeed true, but the Texas-Ohio State game is just such a big game. I think the theory is they want him to go out on the biggest possible game, and they have had both shows at the same spot before, so that is indeed the case. That is indeed the case. Let me get some YouTube comments. We'll see how people are doing there. Let's see if I can figure this out. Here on YouTube. Paul Moon says, I haven't watched Game Day in years. I got tired of the anti-UGA slander. Yeah, so Paul's a good bit younger than me. That's sort of the example of the kind of person I do think is like heavily turned off by Game Day right now. It's just not as good of a football conversation as the one you see on the internet on a regular basis. But a lot of like the basic Game Day shtick that you grow out of, as I said before, when you have a son, or in some cases a daughter, my daughter doesn't care much about football, but when you have a son, you sort of circle back on that. Like the coming to the city, open, headgear at the end of the show, the picks at the end, and you know who's going to get them wildly wrong. Like all that stuff, simple as it is, becomes a big deal again when you watch it through younger eyes. Alex Berger says the Darth Vader was in 2020. Okay, I apologize. I thought it was a little earlier than that. He says the schedule started later that year. The Florida-Georgia game was the next weekend in November. Are you sure? I mean, the season did start later, and Georgia-Florida that year was not in, it was a later, for Georgia-Florida. But was the Darth Vader in 2020? Was that the case? I feel like it was earlier than that. Whitefield says, what game time sticks out to you? Mine are the Auburn at night, Bam at home at night, and then Kentucky, Mississippi State at noon. Yeah, so like for me, selfishly for me, I do high school football. The Mississippi State game time is going to be the toughest turnaround. That's a tougher turnaround for me. I also think because of the fact that's maybe the worst team in the SEC, among the worst teams maybe in the country, that's also a pretty sleepy atmosphere right there. So, we always point out where, the Georgia schedule is really tough. It is fair to say that one of your SEC road games may be a bad team playing 11 a.m. Now, you got to be careful that you don't sleepwalk through it either, and sometimes that happens. So Georgia's got to be careful not to sleepwalk through it either. In the second half last year against Mississippi State, that's pretty much what they did. But if that's one of your true road games, then you've probably gotten a nice little benefit from that. I would think that's probably true. Spencer Clark says Mississippi State game's a tricky trap game to me, honestly. Could be true, and I certainly hope this is not famous last words. Last year, obviously, they pushed, Georgia in the second half of a game that was otherwise non-competitive. The quarterback who did that's also transferred to LSU. He's going to be their backup. I mean, this is one of the least, notable SEC teams I've seen in quite some time. All right, so it was in 2020. I love this headline. By the way, Mark Long is the AP writer down there in Florida. He's had some doozies against Florida over the years. Like no one has held their feet to the fire better than this guy has. I just think this is really funny. Headline for the Associated Press: This is how great things used to be. Florida's Mullins uneven month ends in Darth Vader costume. Is that not great? So it was in 2020. Boy, it's funny how your mind kind of plays tricks on you because I'd sort of remember that being a different year, but there you go. Very funny stuff. Chef Jay Bowen says Auburn at night is a trap game. I would say Auburn at night is a tough game. Trap game is a game that you maybe don't see coming, that sneaks up on you. I don't think Auburn at night should be in that category. I think this is one of the toughest games that Georgia will play this year. I do. Now, as I said during the show, in the freeze era, Jordan-Hare Stadium hasn't quite had the same feel it once did, but still one of the toughest schedules you're going to be. One of the toughest road environments you're going to face. Chef Jay also asking about the Auburn quarterback. We believe it's going to likely be Jackson Arnold. They bring in Deuce Knight, elite prospect from the class of 2025. Probably not quite ready to be the guy just yet. Arnold had some issues at Oklahoma, but honestly, I kind of question how he was handled at Oklahoma a bit too. I think he could find new life with Hugh Freeze. And as we've said, Singleton comes over from Tech as a wide receiver. Cam Coleman's still there. This could be a pretty potent Auburn offense this year. It really could. Really could. Let us see what else. Let me go back to DawgNation.com. UGA Marine says, anybody saying the UNLV facilities were as good as Florida's? I mean, honestly, that was always one of the big knocks on Florida. I think they've tried to fix this, although I don't know they've worked very hard. At one point in time, going back years ago, we would have said, okay, well, Georgia needs to kind of catch up in the facilities arms race. I think some of that's always been kind of overstated a little bit. But Florida has just never put a lot of – I mean, Florida has been among the more frugal programs in the SEC, have never really been big spenders. So it would not actually be that hard to have as good of facilities as Florida's had because they have not put a lot into that. And Brooke Dog asked, yes, UNLV still plays at Sam Boyd Stadium there in Las Vegas, not Allegiant Stadium. Savannah Bryan also said he heard that UNLV does not have the full amount of money to pay Dan Mullen's contract. My understanding is that is true. Now, Colorado also said the same thing when they hired Deion Sanders, that they didn't have enough money to pay it right now. They're going to have to figure it out as they went along. So you've got a lot more programs right now. And this, we haven't really done a lot on the private equity investment in college athletics because it's frankly not obvious exactly which way this is all going here right now. UCLA, for instance, was mentioned as a team taking on private equity money. They've kind of denied that. But the point is that when you get in bed with private equity, that's just sort of a fancy way of saying you have taken on a bunch of debt. Like they can give you, in some cases, hundreds of millions of dollars, but it's just a fancy loan. I mean, it seems like an easy button to kind of catch up in the financial arms race, but it's just a fancy loan. And you don't have benevolent creditors when you are dealing with private equity. Just don't. And so this is the trick right now. Okay, if you're UNLV, all joking aside, you'd love to have Dan Mullen as your coach. You're going to be highly levered to be able to afford it. And that is just risky. I mean, it is. And I think a lot of these programs, including bigger ones than UNLV, I think are looking at a kind of a high debt leverage situation. And honestly, like some of these programs may think they're so-called too big to fail. They may find out they're not too big to fail. Like we may see some real, and we've almost seen this before. We may see some real debt issues with college athletics here coming up very soon. In fact, I'm pretty sure we did see that with some of these collectives that we never got, never heard too much about. A lot of these collectives were sending way more money out than they were bringing in. They just were. And it's sort of like the big tech theory of like churn rate and things like that, that if you can get big enough, fast enough, it doesn't matter if you do so at a deficit. That is not financial advice. That's just how some of these big tech firms operate. That you burn through a bunch of money as a way of becoming a ubiquitous force. And then after that, you figure out a way to make money and kind of pay back your debt. Not financial advice. That's just how some big tech firms do it. I think if I had my guessing, that's how some of these collectives were also operating too. Let's get big. Let's become a factor in people's awareness. And then we'll figure out how to, make the books work later on. If I had to guess, that is what happened. Savannah Bryan looking back on the atmosphere for the 2021 Georgia-Arkansas game. It was amazing. It was amazing. Bill Camacho mentioning the Kentucky game being at noon. You are limited. Is it one SEC game at noon? Is that what you're limited to? Now, you can have other non-conference games also be at noon, but I do believe you're limited on the number of noon games you can get. you're gonna get stuck with one, of course, in all likelihood. Although, did Georgia not have one last year? And listen, we have a long history of Georgia-Kentucky being one of those games that Georgia, for whatever reason, seems to sleepwalk its way through. So we'll see how noony that one feels when it actually gets played. All right, let me get some Facebook comments. Let's see how people are doing on Facebook. We'll also get some more YouTubes here too. So on Facebook. By the way, Dana Varnado says that Gunnar Stockton is Stetson Bennett 2.0. So there you go. Big prediction there for Gunnar Stockton. Ken Holcomb says, does Facebook not work on your Mac? The truth is, I'm just signed out on my Mac, and the only time I ever use Facebook is during the show, so I always just sort of forget to sign in. I'm also getting ready to get a new laptop, so we'll get signed in on Facebook here eventually. Gary Holt says, what do you think about all the teams getting bye weeks before playing us? That's just one of those things that's going to happen when you're Georgia. And keep in mind, this is also one of those years, too, where schedule anomaly means that there are 2 off weeks. Georgia has 2. Everybody else has. So some of it seems like a lot of teams have off weeks before playing Georgia. Some of that is related to, this is another one of those years in which everybody has 2 bye weeks. When the schedule is, certain number of Saturdays in the fall, it creates the need for 2 off weeks so that you finish the season when you want to finish it. So that's what some of that is. This goes back to the old, Nick Saban era at Alabama when they also faced a lot of that too. They really did. And, there had been some, research that the off week before the big Alabama game doesn't help you as much as you might think. You might be better off having the off week after Alabama so you can recuperate and get ready to go play the rest of your schedule. But that's not really the way that people ever operated. Randy Hall mentioning Brian Wilson from the Beach Boys passed away. Really just an incredibly, it's like if you're my age, when you were a kid, the Beach Boys were on the oldie station. And it seemed like old music to people like my age. But as you get a little older, I think, get a different appreciation for just how wild that sound was when it was popular. That I guess and I'm not a music head, so bear with me if this is not quite correct, but when Brian Wilson, the Beach Boys, when they're at their apex, a little bit like what Nirvana might have been like the early 90s in terms of sort of introducing a kind of new sound that was unlike anything, like really innovative. And obviously, a lot of that music's beautiful. It's been used in movies and things like that a lot. I'm not the biggest Beach Boys fan, but musical genius, no doubt whatsoever. No doubt. Favorite Beach Boys song, probably Sloop John B. That's probably my favorite Beach Boys song. Let's see what else. Here on Facebook. Brian Whitaker enjoying some peach cobbler last night. How about that? I had a little dessert last night. Try not to eat a lot of dessert during the week. I had a little dessert last night. It was good. It was good. Peach cobbler was an option, but I chose something different. Get a lot of peach cobbler talking here. Bill Sanders also on the subject of private equity. Yeah, we've seen, and listen, I'm sure there are many cases when private equity has stepped in and saved a company that otherwise would have fallen apart. Perhaps that's the case. But there are some venerable brands that, have not survived. And, there was a connection in some cases to that. Now, they would probably also say, hey, listen, this company's going to go out of business anyway. And perhaps that was the case. The only point is not to denigrate private equity. It's just to simply say that for the college athletic departments that take on private equity money. I know that sounds like really fancy and sort of like Bloomberg TV-ish, but it's just a fancy way of saying you've taken on a very, very expensive loan with very stern creditors. That's all that really means. Jonathan Aaron says, which Beach Boy was with the Manson family? I actually don't. I mean, I've heard something along those lines, but I don't know for sure. That's a little bit before my time, but I do know there's some sort of something there with the Manson family and music. I have to say that's one of those eras I don't really feel like I know enough about. Like I saw that like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, the movie. I mean, it was a good movie, but I was confused by it because I think some of that was sort of like intentionally fictitious. So like the whole like, Manson era and some of that stuff, California around that time. What a strange place. What a strange place. Chef Jay Bowen says, as a vinyl collector, I just actually picked up a mint copy of Pet Sounds' great all-time album. I'll tell you, when I think of the Pet Sounds album, one of the things I think about is the movie Almost Famous, which is one of my favorite movies. I think one of the great movies of all time. And when the sister is like sharing albums with her brother as she's getting ready to like move out of the house or whatever, one of the albums that she gives is the Pet Sounds album. I always notice that. And that when I think of that vinyl, that's what I think of. I think of that movie. All-time great movie, by the way. All-time great movie. Curtis Jackson says, I'm showing my age here a little bit. In my day, growing up in South Georgia, Sunday dinner was completed with blackberry cobbler and vanilla ice cream. Boy, that sounds good. That sounds like a good way to finish off Sunday dinner. Listen, I grew up in the era of Sunday dinner, too, with my grandparents, and always loved all that. Ken Holcomb says, I saw the Beach Boys after a Braves game when Ron Gant was a rookie. That was a long time ago. Good show, albeit hot as Hades. Yeah, I've been to some of those like post-Braves game concerts. For whatever reason, they're all just 200 degrees. 200 degrees. Okay, so there you go. Dennis Wilson, not to be confused with sometimes commenter, who's the big Miami fan, Dennis Wilson. But yeah, Dennis Wilson, apparently connected to the Manson family. There's all kinds of like documentaries and stuff like this. I need to watch some of those. I don't really feel like I know as much about that. Ralph Price, by the way, going back to the Kirby Smart topic to begin the show, says, if my coaching record is 1-6 with a national title, I'll take it. Yeah, I mean, I don't think Kirby Smart has much to apologize for at all. I think you're right about that. Randy Hall mentioning maple bacon donuts. I like maple, I like bacon, and I like donuts. I don't know that I like all three together, or certainly bacon and donuts together. I don't think I like that together. Gary Roach, thank you for the kind words. He says, thanks for reading our comments and answering our questions. Gary, I appreciate you being here each and every day. This is a fun thing for me to do. Really is. Very fun. So I'm glad that you enjoy it. RKD says, anybody else think of Rush Hour and you think of the Beach Boys? Yeah, there are a lot of those Beach Boys songs that end up getting used in movies and TV shows. And I would say like the Rolling Stones a little bit the same way. Now, I feel like I probably know more of the Rolling Stones catalog, but like if you're my age, kind of generation behind Beach Boys, Rolling Stones, things like that, I think you mostly associate that music with the movies and TV shows that it's been a part of. And I mean, it's like, how many times has like Gimme Shelter been used in like all these different movies and things like that? And, it's like, to me, I sort of think of it as a soundtrack first and as a standalone song, far, far separate. In fact, if I ever do hear it, or just any songs like that, Beach Boys, Rolling Stones, some of that stuff that's, from kind of a previous generation, I can't really separate it from the pop culture that it's connected to. Same way with like, say, Don't Stop Believin' by Journey. Like for me, that'll always be the Sopranos finale. I mean, it's a huge song, big hit. It's been in all kinds of stuff, but boy, when you including like the final song for every cover band you've ever seen, but just to a certain group of people from a certain age, it just has these like deep pop cultural connections. Spencer Clark says he loves jelly donut. I do love donuts now. It's one of those things I try not to eat very much of, but I do love donuts. And I do get the idea. People like the salty bacon with the sweet thing. I do get that. I do. I just don't like stuff like flakes of something on my donut. I know that people like kind of fancy stuff like that. I don't do a lot of that. I am hungry right now, though. Gary Roach says, do you remember the Fat Boys? Yeah. The Fat Boys makes me think about roller skating. Because like when, and I was never really cool enough to go roller skating a lot. But back when like roller skating was huge, the Fat Boys were literally and figuratively huge. That is very much a roller skating phenomenon in my mind. All the cool kids used to go to like the roller skating rink every Friday night, but I was not cool enough to do that. Let us see what else before we go. UJ Marine says there's a company in Branson, Missouri that makes maple bacon that will change your life. Listen, now I think I would like maple bacon. I just don't want maple bacon donut. But like if I'm eating like a big plate of like waffles or pancakes and like the bacon kind of gets mixed in with the syrup, I love that. So a sweet, kind of sort of drizzle on bacon does not sound bad at all. Savannah Bryant says the Dogs have not beaten Bama between the hedges since 2003. I was at that game. It was domination. And that's sort of, kind of the deal here because like, you beat them in 2003, the horrible loss in 2008. You played him in 2015, horrible loss there too. And now you get a chance to play him here in 2025. Just really weird these two teams have played so infrequently. All right, we got to go. Good stuff to everyone. Thank you for being here. Bill Sanders looking back on the Fat Boys and Chubby Checker doing the twist. I guess I remember Wipeout, the Fat Boys Wipeout. Yeah, so that's the Fat Boys right there. It's interesting. I forgot there were 3 of them. For some reason, I thought there were only 2. But yeah, so like this would have been late 80s doing Wipeout. And like I said, big roller skating song. Also, like, I know that they weren't like the first like rap group, but like that's back at least in the eyes of a elementary school kid. Like the whole notion of rap music was sort of a new thing too. Not something that I had all that much familiarity with. All right, we are going to go. Barry Watkins enjoys the fireworks after a Braves game. I do too. If you ever get a chance, this is not a commercial, but like the Friday night fireworks, always really fun. Always really fun. They do a good job with that. I'm a big fan of fireworks. Like somebody mentioned, like Branson, Missouri, like anything kind of like corny like that, all into it. Branson, fireworks displays, I just into all of that. Randy Hall hoping to have a get together here very soon. Hopefully we can make a couple of announcements here in the very near future about something anyway. Brian Whitaker mentioning the Beach Boys song Kokomo, which I'm assuming was their last hit, right? Cocktail soundtrack. Once again, speaking of soundtracks, Kokomo on the Cocktail soundtrack. I think for most Beach Boys fans, that's not fondly remembered. But I tell you, man, I do remember that Cocktail soundtrack, though. It's one of those situations where I would say the soundtrack bigger than the movie. I knew a lot of people that had that soundtrack. I don't know a lot of people who love that movie. It's just one of those weird things. But that's back when like Tom Cruise was just, Mr. Everything. Of course, here we are all these years later and very little has changed on that front. Senior Dog 54 had a recent encounter with a 4-foot snake. That's super scary. It's snake time of year, but I am scared of snakes. All right, we got to go. Y'all check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price promised. We love our friends at RS Andrews. And as I was coming in, so last night sitting outside for a little bit, and it was really, like I guess you call it muggy, humid, hot. This morning, walking out of the car already really hot. You're like, Yep, that's it. Summer's here. That's it. Summer is here. And that means air conditioning units, be ready to go because they're going to be working overtime. Make sure yours is ready. Get it tuned back up to factory fresh specs. Get some new life out of that old unit with our friends at RS Andrews. Find them online, rsandrews.com. All right, have a great day. Back tomorrow, Dawg Nation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. We'll look forward to talking to them.